We are recording tonight's meeting, and let's get started. So first off, I want to welcome everyone. I know it's been a little while, but glad to see a number of familiar faces and glad to see that everyone's doing well. Hope everyone's been well since we last spoke. Just a reminder for anyone that may not remember, my name's Corey Pitt. I was the project manager on the planning study that we did and completed back in 2019, and I'm still continuing to help out on the BRT project. So I'm gonna start off with just a little bit of overview of tonight's meeting, and then I'll turn it over to our project manager and our consultant team to walk through some of the materials tonight. So again, welcome. Just gonna walk through a couple of refresher controls on how to use the Zoom. I'm sure at this point we're all experts in using Zoom, but did want to touch on a couple of things. Just a reminder, we are recording tonight's meeting so that we can post it for anyone that isn't able to make it tonight. If for some reason you don't want your voice or likeness recorded, you don't have to turn on your camera, and you're welcome to ask questions through the chat as opposed to over the mic. I would ask that everyone please keep themselves on mute until you get recognized to ask a question. This way we can cut down on kind of the over talking that happens in these virtual meetings. And that way everyone can hear the speaker. When we do get to a point where you would like to ask a question or we open the floor up to questions, we'll use the raise hand feature. That way we can kind of acknowledge everyone in an orderly fashion, and that way you get to ask your question without other people talking over you. And if you have called in by telephone, which I don't think I saw anyone call in by telephone, you use the *6 feature on your phone to unmute yourself. So in order to ask questions, if you want to ask questions during the meeting, we've got some folks that are monitoring the chat. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a little balloon with the chat. If you click on that, it'll bring up the chat window, and then you can type your questions into that. And we've got staff, like I said, monitoring the chat that can break in and ask your questions to the speaker.
It says chat disabled.
That's weird. I didn't think. Oh, that should be fixed now.
Yay, thank you.
Yep. So raising your hand when we get to the point where people are asking questions. So Zoom has modified things. I don't know when the last time you used Zoom, but if you look under the emotions button, which should be on the bottom of the screen, a window will pop up with some emojis as well as a raise hand button. I'm sorry, reactions, not emotions. If you click on the reactions button, a new window will pop up. Click on raise your hand, it'll circle your window and highlight it in yellow, and that way we can recognize you, and then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Again, if you dialed in by phone, you can raise your hand by clicking *9. So I thought we'd just go through and do a round of introductions to refamiliarize ourselves with the team and everyone here, and then we'll get into tonight's meeting. So with me, I have Darcy Buckley, who is one of our planners in the director's office, as well as Joanna Conklin, who's our program manager for BRT, who sits in the director's office. I think, I didn't see whether she had joined yet, but we should have Sandra Marks, who's actually a new addition to our team since last spring. She's joined the BRT team, and she's actually the project manager on the North Bethesda Transitway and the New Hampshire projects that are getting underway. So if you're interested in those projects, I'm sure you will get to meet her. And then we've got our project manager this evening with us as well, Denny Finneran. And she'll be running through the first part of the presentation. We also have a couple of folks from the consultant team here, Mike Chamberlain, who's with Stantec, who is the project manager for the consultant side. We also have Laurie Adgate, also from Stantec. She's leading the design efforts. Randy Napick from IBI Group is helping out on kind of the transit operations and BRT operations and those aspects. Randy, is Andrew with us tonight? Yep.
Yes, I think he has joined on. Yep.
I'm here,
And
Corey.
we also have Andrew Pease
Also,
with us,
yeah.
also from IBI Group. So plenty of folks to be able to answer questions this evening. So with that, I'm going to actually, I thought since there's only a handful of us, maybe we quickly run through introductions. I'll call out folks. And if you want to introduce yourself and just remind us the group that you're representing. So I'll start. Let's see who's the first on my list. Richard Lindstrom.
Hi, I'm Dick Lindstrom. I'm from Gaithersburg. Been watching this for some years.
Glad to have you with us tonight, Dick. Peter Katz.
Yeah, I live in Kensington. I've been involved in planning for years. I now run a transportation-related nonprofit called SmartGo.
Great to see you, Peter.
Hey.
Dave Rosenbaum. I'll skip to, let's see, Deborah Michaels.
Hi, I'm Debbie Michaels. I live in close to downtown Bethesda, right across from NIH at Glenbrook Village HOA.
Great. Nice to have you with us. Mark Pace.
I'm Mark Pace. I'm the parking and transportation manager at Montgomery College.
Let's see, I see first name only, Heather. All right. Jerry Callistine.
Hi, I'm Jerry Callistine. I'm from College Gardens, which is right behind Montgomery College in Rockville, and I've been part of this one way or another for quite a long time now. So looking forward to what's next.
Great, glad to have you. Jerry Garson.
I'm Jerry Garson with the Montgomery County Civic Federation, Transportation Chair.
Good to have you, Jerry. Let's see, Jesse from Planning.
Hi, this is Jessica McGowan from the Montgomery County Planning Department.
Margaret Shope.
Yes, I'm Margaret Shope. I live up here in Germantown. I'm the organizer of the TAME Coalition, that's Transit Alternatives for Mid-County Highway Extended, and have been at part of the CAC for either since 18 or 19.
Glad to have you. Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy Abelis. I've been involved with this from before there were even CACs. I also serve on the BRAC committee, which is pretty much over, but that's the base realignment over at Walter Reed, and I chaired that. And we're right on, my community is right overlooking 355 across from NIH. And I've also served on the Transportation Planning Board, Citizens Advisory, Community Advisory, and I've chaired that also.
Great, glad to have you, Nancy. Peggy Schwartz.
I'm Peggy Schwartz. I'm with the North Bethesda Transportation Management District. So we serve the areas around the Grosvenor, White Flint, and Twin Brook Station. I'm not on any of the CACs, but just been interested in this project for a long time now, and also a resident of East Bethesda, just south of NIH.
Good to see you, Peggy. Roger Fox.
Hi, I'm Roger Fox. I'm at the Grosvenor Park 2 condominiums right at Tuckerman Lane and Rockville Pike, right by the Grosvenor Metro.
Susan Roberts.
Hi, I'm Susan Roberts. I'm here representing National Institute of Health, Division of Facilities Planning.
Tim Goodfellow.
Yes, good evening. I'm a resident of Montgomery Village, and I'm interested to learn more details about this very exciting and needed project.
And Zach Trupp.
Hi there, Zach Trupp, representing the Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors.
I think I may have missed Richard Levine.
Hi, excuse me. I'm Richard Levine, and I'm with the Traffic Committee on the Locust Hill Citizens Association, which is across the street from Nancy and Abelus, just inside the Beltway on 355. And I've been involved in transportation planning along the corridor for a very long time, including the BRAC projects and with the working on the Corridor Advisory Committee before there were corridor advisory committees, in fact, just on all of these issues. So hi. And also I say to Roger Fox at Grosvenor Park 2, I am a unit owner there and will like to be my daughter lives there and we can be in touch separately. Okay.
Sounds good.
Great. Glad to have you. And I do see, it looks like there's one number here. I don't know if it's tied to one of the other, if you're using your audio, but the number ends in 6581 if you'd like to introduce yourself. Hit *6 to unmute. All right. Did I miss anyone? Not hearing anything. I will turn the show over to Denny.
Hi, everybody. Long time no see. It is nice to see everybody. I'm going to really quickly go through the meeting and objectives and the agenda review. If you can move on the next slide, Randy. So the objectives tonight are to update y'all on the status of the 355 BRT project, including the BRT elements that were included in the county executive's proposed budget. We're also going to review some of the engineering and design updates since we met last in April of last year. And wow, it's been 10 months. That's crazy. And we're going to provide you all with an opportunity to ask questions and provide feedback on everything that we're presenting. So we've already gone through the agenda and the objectives, and now we're going to give you a brief project update. And then after that, oh, you can go back real quick. I'm sorry. Then we're going to do a budget update. We're going to talk about what elements of the BRT project were included in the recently announced county executive's budget. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the BRT running way and lane repurposing analysis that is underway. And then we're going to go through some next steps. I'm sorry, now you can go on to the next slide. So for a quick project update. Some of these slides are going to be old hat to you. I do think we might have one or two folks who have not been on these meetings before. So I will gloss over some of these. If at any point anybody has questions, do feel free to raise your hand. The purpose of the project is to provide a new transit service with greater travel speed and frequency along Maryland 355 between Bethesda and Clarksburg that will help accomplish the following. And it's a whole list of bullets that are trying to solve a lot of greater ills along the corridor, from improving transit access and safety and addressing ridership demands. And I'm not going to read them all, but you all can read them. So the current project status, we are in the preliminary engineering phase and we're approaching 25% design. Alternative B modified, as we have mentioned in the past, is the basis of design. We are making refinements to the alignments and the segments of the project, you know, how we're breaking it up. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. And we're making some modifications to the service plan that we proposed in the previous phase. And we've done all of this in order to enhance performance and to reduce costs and impacts. The county's budgeting process is currently considering funding for the planning, design, and construction of BRT corridors throughout the county, including this one. And Corey's going to give a little presentation about that in a few slides. So if you can hold any questions on that until we get to that point. So we've seen a slide a little bit like this before in the past, and here we are in the preliminary engineering box doing all of this work design refinements, performance refinements, the surveys, the right-of-way, the environmental and traffic analysis, scope, schedule, and cost estimate. And the next two phases would be final design and construction, which we have recommended for funding in the latest budget. As I said, we will discuss this later on in the presentation. Move on to the next slide. So you've seen this map before too. So here is the 7 segments of the project, starting down at segment 1 in Bethesda and traveling to the north, all the way up to Clarksburg in segment 7. We still continue it in our same breakout from Grosvenor to Bethesda Metro Rail. And then segment 2 runs through the Rockville Pike area. Segment 3 is in Rockville Town Center. Segment 4 runs from College Parkway to Summit Avenue, just south of the Gaithersburg core. Segment 5 really does run through the Gaithersburg core area up to Montgomery Village Avenue. Segment 6 runs from Montgomery Village Avenue up to Middlebrook Road. And then segment 7 is where we leave the Maryland 355 alignment and travel up to Clarksburg from Middlebrook Road via Observation Drive and Snowden Farm Parkway. So what have we been doing since last April? We've been doing a whole lot. We completed the 15% design phase in July, and we began moving toward 25% design, which is targeted to be completed in April. We completed multiple technical studies to refine the transit service and infrastructure design. Some of the things we've worked on include coordination with State Highway Administration on removal of some of the free right turns along the corridor. That is a sort of charge that the county has been taking on in some of the locations to head towards the Vision Zero objective of reducing pedestrian accidents in the county. We've also been working with Montgomery College and Montgomery County Public Schools on a transit center location near Montgomery College, Rockville. We've been working with the city of Gaithersburg regarding the Lake Forest Transit Center's ultimate configuration and coordination with a future development that may occur in that location. And we've been working out the details for the potential interim terminus station location at Montgomery College, Germantown. And we do continue to meet with all of our partner agencies, including FTA, State Highway Administration, the cities of Rockville and Gaithersburg, Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, WMATA, Montgomery College, and Montgomery County Park and Schools. I'm sorry, Montgomery County Public Schools. I apologize. Next slide. Actually, before we move on to the next slide, do you all have any questions on any of that before we go on to the next section? Because the next section is going to be the budget presentation. So do you have any questions about the engineering or where we stand with the design and the service refinements?
I do.
Okay, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, so you talked about modifications to the service plan to improve budgets and reduce impacts. My question is, will any existing bus lines be entering the corridor to enable seamless transfers inside the corridor, or will it all be intermodal connections between existing bus lines and the BRT corridor? And that, of course, has impact on fares. You know, will you be paying a new fare when you get, if it's an intermodal connection, will you be paying a new fare when you get onto the BRT?
Randy, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I can try to speak to that a bit, Peter. So I'll just have to defer on some of the fare comments to the county staff. Of course, there's a fair holiday going on that's been active through a lot of COVID. So the current approach to the service design, Peter, has been to basically have multiple BRT patterns that serve different portions of the corridor. Generally, the thinking is that local routes, sort of other ride-on routes coming into the corridor, would interface at some of the transit center locations. So would require a transfer to BRT. Really simply reflecting the fact there are so many branches of the local service network, but trying to provide as seamless of connection as possible to the trunk BRT line. The BRT line itself, is because we have a long corridor that is really doing many things over its 22-mile length, is envisioned to consist of multiple service patterns. Some are focused more on access to Shady Grove Metro. Some are focused more on some of the intra-corridor travel between the different existing and emerging activity centers up and down the corridor. So
I need to be clear. A seamless connection is a connection where the bus you're on leaves you on the same platform as the BRT bus. And you see that bus when you're coming in, you see the timing of it. And then the buses acknowledge each other, they wait for each other. So you're able to move from bus to bus without paying a new fare. An intermodal connection is where it may be at the same transit center, but it's where you're coming in on a bus to one location, you get off that bus, you go into a new platform, and you pay a new fare. Generally, you lose about 40% ridership with intermodal connections. That's the kind of standard industry statistic. So, for example, the Brisbane light rail or Ottawa, every bus in Ottawa is the same bus that runs in the BRT corridor. And both of those get very fast connecting times. They're very precise. And people can move across those regions very quickly, usually faster than by car. That's what creates the ridership that makes BRT successful. So, intermodal connection is a very specific theme, and a seamless connection is a very specific thing. And your service plan usually is very clear as to what those are. It's not a vague thing, and it has implications regarding the whole fare strategy. So I'm not sure that your answer is clear to me, or whether it doesn't sound like that's been decided yet. But I can't make out from your answer whether they're intermodal or seamless connections.
Yeah, so I guess the way you're describing it, they're maybe a bit less seamless. We're looking at the BRT more of I guess a closed system compared to, you mentioned Ottawa. I think that the Pittsburgh busways work in a similar fashion to Ottawa. Hartford works a lot like the system in Ottawa, where you have many lines coming in and they sort of feed into the busway. Again, with the caveat that there's a lot of moving parts with overall service redesign for the ride-on network through the Ride and Reimagine study that's kicking off, and some other parts. Generally speaking, we'd be trying to make as convenient as possible connections to local services through transit centers and other transfer points, but would require a change of vehicle, and probably in most cases a change of platform.
So it's an intermodal connection. I would commend you to look at a very early study by ITDP that made a very strong recommendation towards seamless connections. And that's if you don't have that document, it was done for Montgomery County years ago, but it made a service recommendation. It was pretty clear and had a lot of benefits in terms of timing and making optimal use out of all the existing transit lines.
Okay, we'll make note of that. Thank you, Peter.
All right, Jerry, do you have a question? Unmute yourself, please.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes, you are.
My real question is, when you start looking at the cost proposed, which is like $314,370,000, we could provide free ride-on service for the next 15 years for everyone at the same cost of this. I think most riders who ride buses who don't have cars would rather have free transit, and especially free ride-on and free buses within the county. At the moment, the buses are free through July 2nd of this year. And my other question is this, there are now proposals in their meetings, I think in about 2 weeks, on a proposal for mass transit along 370, but 270. I'm not sure where all the stops are going to be, but is this done in conjunction so we can save money, or is it done piece by piece? I know this project started over 7 years ago, and we now see what's happened with the purple line, that we're having enormous delays, and now they're promising us a minimum of 4.5 years of delay. We also see that the ridership on rail and the use of parking lots like in Shady Grove have dropped dramatically since COVID. And many people think that the transit systems will only have any quantity of people on them on basically Wednesdays and Tuesdays, Wednesdays, maybe Thursdays, or maybe Mondays, but they know Friday it's just basically disappeared. Right now, if you look at the rail, the number of people who use the parking lots in Montgomery County, which includes both the 270 side and the Silver Spring side, we're seeing we're only getting, like in the month of November, 1,142 people who are using the parking lots who have cars. Most people think the people who started who for 2 years are using their cars are not going to be going back to transit. Is this all factored into the plans?
I'll jump in and take that one, Denny. So in terms of bus ridership, we've actually seen bus ridership hold pretty steady even during the pandemic. The Route 55 has actually almost returned to its pre-COVID levels of ridership from what we've seen recently. So that shows positive results for bus ridership in the corridor, specifically 355. I think in terms of the other studies you mentioned, the I-270, we're coordinating closely with the state on the managed lanes or opportunity lanes project and the associated improvements with that. We've been coordinating with the planning department very closely on their corridor forward recommendations and making sure that everything is seamless in terms of what they're recommending and how that ties into the work that we have underway. And of course, the team here in engineering will be working hand in hand with our folks over in transit who are working on the Ride on Reimagine study and how those routes are going to interact and work in concert with the BRT and vice versa. I think in general, we feel strongly that the bus ridership is going to hold and return strongly, that the people that are taking bus transit have continued to take bus transit and don't have many options. So providing them a better choice for travel in these corridors is priority number one. And that's where BRT and other rapid improvements are going to improve how they travel in these corridors and get them greater access to jobs and opportunities.
My real question now, do you have figures on the ridership on the 46, 55, and the 101? I mean, recently they've cut out the 101 totally. So if you cut out the 101, you'd say there's an increase in ridership on the 55 because the 101 is not operating. But are any figures on these available? Haven't seen anything published since for about 1.5 years on data on ridership. Is this data available so we can actually look at it and measure how much is a decrease off of the 101 since that's not even operating, which is basically an express bus along 355?
So I've put out a request to our transit folks. Again, I don't work for the transit division, so I don't have access to the ridership figures. As soon as I can get some ridership figures from our transit division, I'm happy to share what is available with everyone.
Okay, why don't we move on? Tim, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. So I think it was segment or section 7. I don't remember exactly what color it was or the number, but you talked about the route on Observation Drive up to Snowden Farm Parkway. And that's not a direct connection, as you know. I'm assuming that takes into consideration the county CIP project for the extension of Observation Drive to Little Seneca Parkway. Little Seneca Parkway then connects to Snowden Farm Parkway. So I'd like a clarification on that. And then do you have like specific route, directional movements? Would it be going north on Snowden Farm Parkway to Clarksburg Road or kind of that small southern section of Snowden Farm Parkway? And then final question, then it would make sense to me, just looking at the maps and living here for my whole life, to have the route go back down south on 355 after it makes that circular loop through Clarksburg. So can you address those 3 points, please?
Sure. So segment 7 in the north end, and I'm trying to find the right description. It does travel both north and south, and it does take into consideration the Observation Drive CIP project. We looked at 3 different alignments in the north end in segment 7, one of which stayed primarily on Observation Drive. However, that because the design is not advancing yet on that piece of design, on that piece of the project, we ended up looking at the alignment that started on and traveled north. Say if you're coming from the south, you would go along Middletown Road and then travel north on the piece of Observation Drive that is already constructed, and then travel across and then go around up to Holy Cross Hospital and then around Goldenrod near Montgomery College, Germantown. And then we come down Milestone Drive, or you come down
Seneca Meadows Parkway over to
Yes.
Milestone.
Yes.
And essentially you'll come across to Snowden Farm Parkway via Ridge.
Right.
We're not assuming the future extension of Observation Drive currently. However, if that ever gets constructed and density materializes on that side as it's planned, we could conceivably either run a second tail up Observation Drive or shift the alignment over to that corridor.
Right. And in segment 7, the alignment is proposed to operate in mixed traffic. It wouldn't be in a dedicated running way. So there would be the infrastructure that would be proposed in that area would just be BRT stations along the corridor, and the buses would run with mixed traffic.
So is that alignment decided now?
That is the option that was included in the recommended alternative. The alternative that was the council expressed a preference for.
So that's the design, that's the one you're going forward with.
Yes, at this time, yes.
Currently, yes, that is the one that's moving forward.
Right.
Okay.
Nancy, I believe you had a question, or did you take?
No, I'm okay, thanks.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right, are there any other questions before we move on to the next portion of the presentation? I don't see any other hands. All right, then let's move on to the next portion.
Switch presentations real quick. All right, Danny, can you confirm that you can see the presentation?
I can see it.
All right. There's some budget meetings that are getting ready to come up as the council takes up the county executive's recommended budget. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time tonight in advance of those meetings, walking through the recommendations in the budget and what that means for a number of BRT projects and answer any questions that people might have. So that's why we're here. I don't think we need to belabor the point about what the flash system is. We've talked about that numerous times in previous meetings, the various aspects of the service. I think we're all familiar with that. In terms of the capital improvement program as it relates to bus rapid transit in the county for the proposed 23-28 budget, There's a recommendation to advance final design and construction for the Veers Mill Road Bus Rapid Transit project, as well as the Maryland 355 Central, what we're calling the Central project, and I'll touch specifically on what that entails here in a minute. We're also proposing to advance final design on the pieces of the project that we're calling Maryland 355 North and South. So the entire project is being recommended to move into final design, but only a portion of the project is being recommended for construction. We've actually started planning. Those studies are just getting underway now, but planning is funded for New Hampshire Avenue, as well as the North Bethesda Transitway. We have funding programmed to advance preliminary engineering on what we're calling our US 29 Phase 2. So this would look to get more dedicated bus facilities along the US 29 corridor and provide improved performance for the flash service that's already operating there. And then there are also two related efforts that are happening in the county. One is called the Great Seneca Transit Network that some of you may be familiar with. This is a network of routes that would connect the Shady Grove Metro with the Life Sciences Center, the universities at Shady Grove, and areas around Shady Grove Adventist Hospital that were supposed to be served by the corridor cities transitway that just isn't moving very quickly. So this is an interim solution to provide improved service to that part of the county. And we have received design and construction funding for the first two routes of what would be a 4-route network over there. And then there's a new program that just got underway this current fiscal year, but we're proposed to receive additional funding. And that program is called the Bus Priority Program. And that program is looking to provide bus enhancements either through dedicated bus lanes, additional transit signal priority, other improvements to improve general bus performance throughout the county, not just focused on bus rapid transit. And the first project that was implemented out of that program were a number of red bus lanes around the Germantown Transit Center. And there's another project looking to implement bus lanes around the Wheaton Metro Station. So stay tuned for those. So I'm going to start with just kind of an overall project benefits of what we see coming out of the budget recommendation. So again, focusing specifically on the Maryland 355 Central and the Veers Mill Road projects. These projects together will improve access and link key locations and activity centers, including Montgomery College campuses, a number of high job centers, healthcare locations, housing, as well as Metro Rail and MARC train. They'll serve existing communities as well as strengthen connections to areas that are planned for future growth that is scheduled or that is planned for transit-oriented growth. The recommendation does align very closely with recommendations that are coming out of the draft corridor forward plan, as well as the Veers Mill corridor plan and the county's climate action plan in terms of the services that are recommended in those documents. Both the projects, the Veers Mill Road and the Maryland 355 Central project, directly serve equity emphasis areas in the county around Germantown, Gaithersburg, Wheaton, and Aspen Hill, as you can see on the map displayed here on the right. The projects will help the county meet its targets to reduce carbon emissions and improve air quality, as well as tackle climate change. It helps ensure regional competitiveness and allows communities to realize their potential as vibrant places. And as we'll see in a couple of slides when I walk through the various funding sources that are proposed, it uses limited county public funding or the limited public funding that's available efficiently and effectively. So I'll start just briefly. I know this is a 355 CAC meeting, but this project does overlap with the 355 corridor for a small portion. But the recommendation is for final design and construction of the Veers Mill Road BRT, which will connect Wheaton and Rockville. So it ties in both lines of the Metro Rail Red Line. We'll look to improve travel time through signal priority, dedicated bus lanes, and queue jumps along the Veers Mill Road corridor. As I'd mentioned previously, it does border a number of equity emphasis areas in the county with a concentration of zero-car households, as well as the corridor carries the top metro bus routes in the county. The project, just like the 355 project, is looking to increase safety and access by removing free rights and redesigning of some major intersections along the corridor to improve safety, as well as adding new bike and pedestrian connections by combining this project with our Veers Mill Road BIPA. For those of you who aren't familiar, our BIPA programs are bike and pedestrian projects, and there are specific areas in the county identified. So we're combining the BIPA with the BRT project to actually leverage additional federal funding to get these projects done faster. And you can see the proposed schedule outlined on the bottom of the screen. This is just a little bit more detail about the Veers Mill Road project. You can see the areas identified for dedicated bus lanes through repurposing of shoulders, queue jumps, and transit signal priority. So the 355 BRT, as I mentioned, we're looking to advance final design on the entire 22-mile long corridor as soon as we complete preliminary engineering. There is funding for construction on what we're calling the central section of the project. And I have a slide on that coming up here. To do dedicated lanes, again, where feasible, through a combination of 2-lane segments as well as single-lane median segments. And there are some areas where there are no dedicated bus lanes. The bus would run in mixed traffic. These are areas where the constraints are just too limiting to widen the road further, primarily in the southernmost sections in Bethesda, or in areas where the congestion is lighter and not warranting an investment in dedicated bus lanes. So the 355 North and the South are combined into one capital program for the time being. The north would be the piece north of Montgomery College in Germantown up to Clarksburg. The southern portion would be from Montgomery College in Rockville, south to Bethesda. So we would be advancing final design on both of these segments, assuming completion of preliminary engineering. And the reason that these two pieces are not funded for construction is there are limited funding dollars available for construction. And given the project complexities that we see in the south, as well as the still emerging land uses in the north, we feel the greatest benefit of those limited construction dollars are in the central portion of the corridor. The county is continuing to look for additional revenue streams to fund construction. So by advancing final design, we'll have the projects ready once those additional construction funds can be identified. And in the interim, the plan would be to redeploy the Ride on Extra service to better serve the southern portions of the corridor, and also look for opportunities to implement new express buses to connect those commuters up in the north to the metro. The 355 Central project would look to advance final design and construction on what is an approximately 10-mile long corridor between Rockville and Germantown, with the various bus lane configurations that I showed on the previous slide. This area, again, it runs through a number of equity emphasis areas in the county and has a concentration of zero-car households, as well as the highest existing ridership for ride-on, which is the Route 55. It would expand connections to job and healthcare centers, 2 community college campuses, as well as the MARC train and the Metro Rail for a portion of the county that's not currently served by Metro Rail. Just a little bit of the data that's backing up these or informing these decisions. So when we look at the forecasted boardings for the BRT routes and break it up into the 3 segments that have been identified, what we see is that over 50% of the boardings are forecasted to occur in the central portion of the corridor. The remaining 40-ish% would occur in the south, and then about 9% occur in the north. The other thing we see is when we actually look at the passenger loading. So this is a little bit different than just straight boardings. This is looking at how many people are riding the bus at any given location along the corridor. And not surprisingly, we see passengers boarding the bus as the bus leaves the north. But what we really see is that when you hit the central section and really around Lake Forest Mall, we see a massive increase in the loading of people getting on the bus. And then again at Shady Grove, not surprisingly, when people transfer to the metro to then access the broader region, we see a drop. And then departing Shady Grove Metro and heading into Rockville, White Flint, and Bethesda, we see kind of a static level of ridership. So these would be people getting off and on in the corridor, doing intermodal trips, connecting to destinations, in between metro stations. But there's kind of a static level, a steady level of ridership. Still critical and still important to serve, but not nearly as high as the demand of ridership that's trying to access the metro stations from points north that don't currently have this level of transit service. Again, I mentioned that the ride on Route 55 is the highest ridership route in the ride-on system. And it has, based on the latest figures that I've heard from our friends over in the transit division, that route is almost returned back to its 2019 pre-COVID ridership levels. So there's still a high demand for bus ridership in the corridor. The Route 46, which serves the southern portion of the 355 corridor, is about half of that ridership. Still strong ridership, still one of the higher ridership routes in the system, but about half of the ridership of the Route 55. So a little bit about the funding sources that are going in to fund both the Veers Mill Road BRT and BIPA, as well as the Maryland 355 Central BRT. So we're assuming that 50% of the funds would come through federal grants. And we'll touch on what those grants are and how we would be seeking those in the next slide. We're also assuming that agreements that have been made between the county and the state relating to the state's opportunity lanes or the toll lanes project on I-270, which is committing funds towards high priority transit projects in the county, would fund the other portion or the majority of the other portion of these project costs. And then there are some other local and state sources that are tied into these projects as well. But again, the primary share of this would be outside county sources that would be funding these two projects, with the Veers Mill BRT and BIPA project at about $94 million and the price tag for the 355 Central project at about $314 million. So the federal grants, these come out of the Federal Transit Administration's Capital Investment Grant Program. There's two primary grants that we would be seeking, new starts and small starts. And the requirements associated with each are really tied to the project costs, as well as the type of project that's being submitted. So new starts project do require that 50% of the project be in dedicated bus lanes, which the Veers Mill project would not meet. However, the small starts program doesn't have that bus lane requirement, and the price tag of projects that would submit for small starts funding have to be under 400 million, but not seeking more than 150 million in the federal share. We do expect that with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was passed by Congress, that this will inject additional funding resources into both of these programs. So while we're not necessarily expecting there to be many new different grant programs, what we do expect is that the pool of funds available for these grant programs will be larger, making it more likely that we will receive grants. In terms of the Maryland opportunity lanes, so the Maryland DOT has committed funds to support high priority transit projects in Montgomery County. This was an arrangement that was agreed to between the two parties. The initial funding amount is $60 million that would be dedicated towards design and permitting of these high priority transit projects at financial close of the deal between the state and their concessionaire, who would be designing and building the toll lanes. And then they've also committed $300 million over the contract horizon of the project, which is 50 years. We have made an assumption with our budget office that we would seek that 300 million upfront through a financing arrangement with the state. So we've assumed a net present value of that 300 million at about 110 million. So roughly 170 million total would be coming from the Opportunity Lanes project. The requirements associated with that funding is the projects must be within or support the I-270 corridor. The project also references the Corridor Forward Study, which is Park and Planning's I-270 transit plan, as a guide for where those funding priorities would emerge. And that plan does identify the Maryland 355 north of Rockville and the Veers Mill BRT as the highest transit priorities in the county for this corridor. So that aligns closely with the CE's recommended budget. So just a quick summary, the capital budget for 23-28 would look to bring fast and reliable transit to areas with proven demand as well as need. We would be maximizing non-county funds for the greatest benefit. And the way the schedule is laid out, it would allow for completion of these two projects within the 6-year time frame of the capital program. So in terms of next steps, there are council hearings scheduled for next week, February 8th and 9th. I believe there are 2 times scheduled for the 8th and a single time scheduled for the 9th, where the council will look to hear comments from the public and anyone that wants to share their feedback on the budget. There's also council hearings scheduled on both the Corridor Forward Plan as well as the Opportunity Lanes funds for February 15th that are open to the public. The various council committees will be taking up the budget and discussing that over the months of March and April through work sessions, and then the budget will be finalized in May. So you all know how to stay connected with us. We've actually been sharing this presentation with a number of different groups. But that's it. So I'm happy to answer any questions about this piece before we move on to the next topic.
Corey, there is a question in the chat. You mentioned that the central segment is proposed for construction in the nearer term. Does this mean that the flash routes would only run in the central segment initially, or would the flash routes run throughout the entire corridor as soon as the central segment opens, just initially without BRT infrastructure in the north and south segments?
So, I think all the details around how the service would operate and whatever infrastructure gets built are not finalized. I think the initial thinking is that it would primarily serve the central portion, although there may be some connections that need to be made outside of that central portion that would occur outside. And so the flash routes may run beyond that to facilitate those connections. Again, we're working closely with our transit division on their Ride on Reimagine study, as well as looking for ways to still serve the north and the south in the interim while we still identify funding sources to advance construction on those pieces as well. Let's see, I see, it looks like Jerry, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I have my hand raised. I see the data that you've given for the 55 and the 46 are only through February of 2020. If you look at the data that WMATA publishes, if you look between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. at Shady Grove Road, they're only getting 875 riders a day. And they're having, based on the data, which when Shady Grove, I'm talking about before they closed the station, we're getting almost 400 people parking at Shady Grove. That means less than 400 and or less than 500 people could be taking the bus, but other buses go to Shady Grove. So this is showing extremely low ridership on the buses and getting off at Shady Grove. This is a major project spending over $300 million. And at the moment, the ridership doesn't look there. Shouldn't we wait till after COVID is over and then determine what the new ridership patterns are? Because basically, from what I see, the people getting off the buses there don't amount to anything major. And basically, the Shady Grove parking lot used to be full regularly. And a lot of people took buses there because they couldn't get a parking spot in Shady Grove. And now the parking lots in all of Montgomery County are only averaging about 8% of their capacity. So shouldn't we be waiting before we spend these millions and millions of dollars that we don't have and actually continue the free ride-on bus service for the next 10 years?
So this isn't just about connecting commuters to Shady Grove, which I think most people expect to return to pre-pandemic levels. We're already starting to see people travel more as we come out of the latest surge that we're currently in. If we look at other historic events that were predicted to be major disruptors, we find that travel patterns reemerge and come back just as strong, if not stronger. This is also about serving the bus riders that just travel this portion of the corridor. Free ride-on service is a great benefit to them, but also just better bus service in general, I think is another valuable asset that we should be looking to provide. So this isn't just about, connecting commuters to Shady Grove Metro. It's about providing the people up in Gaithersburg, up in Germantown, with the better options to travel, to access jobs, to access different jobs than maybe they currently have access to through the existing transit services.
Well, my real question is, I have two neighbors across the street, both the lawyers for the federal government. They used to commute into work, taking a local ride-on bus and then taking Metro into downtown Washington. They hope in the future never to go in more than once a week or once every 2 weeks into this, because they've discovered they're a lot more productive. They can have meetings in the afternoon with people on the West Coast, and most of their work, there's no need to be in the office. We're reaching a 2-year point where people have stopped going to the, I don't know why you think everyone's going to want to rush to go into an office after this is over. Once they've seen how great it is, additional productive hours they have, most people, I don't think, will to an office 5 days a week. And it looks like almost everyone here is in an office, that you seem to be probably in your own homes or someplace.
Actually, I'm in the office today. So we are starting to come back into the office, and we're finding that there is still value with coming together, meeting in person. There are some things that don't work well virtually. And I think that, there will be some careers that probably find that virtual works very well for them and they can get productive benefits at home. But I think there are going to be a number of careers that are going to come back to some degree. And what we're actually expecting to happen is that the drop in kind of peak commuter is just going to change the peak period travel patterns. People are still going to be traveling for all sorts of reasons. Maybe it's not commuting in the morning and commuting in the evening like traditionally, but they're still going to want to access recreational opportunities. They're still going to want to shop. They're still going to want to travel for healthcare visits and other things. If anything, telecommuting is going to help dull the peaks that we used to see during the peak period. But I think we're gonna see travel patterns reemerge as we come out of the pandemic.
Well, we're seeing travel patterns on 270 and 495 basically back to where it was. They were about 90 to 95% of the traffic is back on. If you look at the Middlebrook intersection where they measure traffic on 270, it's over 90% on most days. Yes, on snow days it drops. On the Beltway at the two traffic, the traffic is back to about 90% of where it is. It is more spread out. There's a lot less traffic in the morning rush hour, but the evening rush hours are regularly just as bad as they were before. And even rush hours on the Beltway, especially from New Hampshire Avenue to Georgia Avenue, is just as bad in the morning hours as it is. Yes, we've
okay,
seen that.
thank you, Jerry. So I had someone had written something in the chat. Jerry Kallenstein, he wanted to know a little bit more about the funding source from the toll lanes and if there are any guarantees in place to make sure that the BRT actually gets that money.
So the agreements in terms of the dollar amounts and when they arrive, those are commitments. So the 60 million and the 300 million have been committed. They don't specifically mention a specific project. They mention high priority transit projects, but as I noted, they do reference the state has been referencing the corridor forward plan as kind of a guide for where those funds might go. And that study does list these two projects as the top priority projects in the county. There's still negotiations being worked out. We have other staff working on those MOUs and meeting with the state to iron out all the details. But in terms of the amounts, we do have commitments from the state on those. Let's see, I see Margaret, you've got your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. This is a detail about section 7, which is because I live in Germantown, I'm up and down that northern corridor throughout the week. And when I know this can't be specifically answered here, but I want to bring it up, that when the modified B plan was to take the BRT off of 355 and wrap it around through down the 2-lane State Highway 27 and then make a left and go up Snowden Farm Parkway with 2 roundabouts in that area. The biggest reason for moving it off at the time was that people were not living on 355 into Clarksburg. And that was only in 2018 or 19. Since that time, this short time, there's been developments explode up there. The roads, not all of the 355, but the road continues to widen where 27 is not widening at all, the state highway. It remains a clogged existing 2-lane state highway. And I know this is beyond this scope that we're talking, but the bottom line is, in 2 to 3 years of saying no one is going to be, there's not enough houses on 355 in Clarksburg for people to get on the BRT, that has already changed in a short time, in a short distance, a few miles, okay? Not the remaining miles clear up to the county line. And in looking at these, in looking at some of your, what's it called? Build outs to 2028, I think you had on here. I might have looked at it wrong. It seems like we're still building for 2020 and maybe 2022, where the build outs keep happening. And regardless of what's going to happen with in the long run with us living in this pandemic, the planning and the growth warrants some changes. And I know, and lastly, I know section 7 is not going to be the first that's being built. I like that whole idea about the central area. It deserves to be built. But these are the things that continue to change at a rapid enough pace that it warrants, a continual reevaluation. And that's what we're doing up here in this section of the county. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Those are fair points. And I think at some point we do plan to kind of revisit the underlying ridership assumptions, as well as the models that informed the results that I showed previously for 2040. So hopefully, every year or every so often, the regional body does update the model based on kind of the land use forecast and what they see changing. So we should be able to capture those as we move the project forward.
Corey, I'm going to jump in. There's been some requests if we could do the next part of the presentation, and then we could have time for some more of the additional bigger questions that people might have, and so that those who just kind of are curious about learning about the lanes and stuff could hear that part.
That's probably a good idea given where we are on time, Darcy. So
okay,
you could switch over to the other presentation, Corey.
Sure. We'll switch over. If you have questions on the budget, happy to stick around and get those answered at the end. Back. I think, Mike, you're gonna take over from here, right?
Yes, if you can skip to the next one, I'll start on that one. Hi, everyone. Evening. This is Mike Chamberlain on the consultant team assisting with the prelim design. I'm going to discuss two of the items we've been working on. One is the refinement of the BRT running way in a couple segments based on input from the city of Gaithersburg and the city of Rockville for the 25% submission. And then secondly, I'll touch on lane repurposing, where we replace a local traffic or general purpose lane with a BRT only lane. This is a question that's been posed to MCU DOT from the local jurisdictions, the planning board, and the county council. It has the potential to reduce property impacts and construction costs, but there's also the potential for significant operational and traffic impacts. Next slide, please. Corey touched on some of the configuration earlier, so I won't, I'll try to keep it brief, but back to the prelim design. We're developing a 25% submission for the configuration shown to the right on this slide. It's an updated version of alternate B modified from the study phase. As I mentioned before, segment 3 was switched from a median BRT running way to a southbound dedicated curb lane due to concerns from the city of Rockville with impacts to proposed development along their portion of the corridor. And then in segment 5, we switched from a median BRT lane, a single median BRT lane, to BRT and mixed traffic because of concerns from the city of Gaithersburg for impacts to existing homes and businesses in that portion. And I won't read off all the various segment configurations, but pretty much everything else has stayed the same except the route in segment 7 has adjusted slightly, and we've tweaked throughout the corridor where we've had constraints crop up during design. Next slide, please. Moving on to lane repurposing. On the right is a schematic of the BRT configuration that we analyzed with a traffic model and to develop estimated construction costs. Generally, the approach to lane repurposing, our investigation, was to remove 2 existing lanes along 355 from through segments 2 through 6 to reduce the width of proposed construction along the corridor, while segments 1, 5, and 7, they remained mixed traffic. And we kept and it's kind of a change from alternative B modified is that we switched 4 and 6 to 2 median BRT lanes for the purposes of this analysis, since we wanted to take away an even number of existing lanes. For preliminary results so far, we've shown that in segment 2 has the most potential reduction in construction cost, with the other segments, the potential savings being much less. There was also, correspondingly, there was a significant increase in vehicle delays, and the number of acceptable intersections throughout the corridor dropped significantly with the lane repurposing analysis. I would say through the corridor, through segments 2 through 6, there are about 77 intersections total. When you kind of look at the average of the AM and in the PM peak with no build and alternative B modified, about 70 of the intersections remain acceptable where their level of service or the delay is less than the guidelines in the corridor. Usually in some cases that can be like a 60-second delay. Where the area is more built up, you can get up to like 100-second allowable delay. So no build on alternative B, 70 remain acceptable. When you introduce lane repurposing and you steal 2 of the existing lanes through the corridor, you drop down to 38 acceptable intersections with lane repurposing. Next slide, please. We're continuing this investigation. We still have some work to do on it. A couple of the items that we're looking at, one is the mode shift required to bring up the number of acceptable intersections or reduce the delays to the corridor. We're looking to see, is that number reasonable? Looking to determine that number and to see if that number is reasonable. Can we truly expect that people would shift from their cars to transit, walking, or biking along the corridor? Then, based on some input from park and planning, we're trying to determine the average trip delays for your typical trips along the corridor, something where potentially I-270 isn't where you would head. It's more the local traffic traveling along 355. And then lastly, we're evaluating potential diversion routes for traffic, such as I-270, and how that could maybe reduce traffic on 355 with lane repurposing. I think that's it for me. I don't know if Randy is next or Denny's with next steps.
Yeah,
Sorry.
can you move to the next slide, please?
But if we want to stop and answer any questions about
Yes.
lane repurposing. Well,
I do have a
guess-
question.
Okay, go ahead.
When you've got buses that are doing both curb running and median running, you end up losing a lot of seats because you have exit doors on both sides of the bus.
We are designing it so that we are not having exit doors on both sides of the bus.
How do you do that with, so you're at your stations, they're always exiting one side?
Yes, they are.
Which side is that?
The right side.
The curb side?
Yes, curb side.
Right.
Got it.
So Peter, if we were in the center running way, the stations would be to the right of the center running, kind of in a staggered fashion. So they don't make the road excessively wide at a given point. So they would not be like one center platform shared by both directions with left side doors.
And so again, that's the same as a standard Montgomery County bus currently, right?
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah. Currently, as the station platforms are designed on the US 29 BRT, and that is the design that we are carrying forward on the Veers Mill Road and the 355 BRT, the station platforms are higher than traditional bus stops. So the interface between the station platform and the bus does not work as well with a regular ride-on bus as it does. Or it does. Never mind. That's incorrect. I'm sorry.
It works.
It works. I'm sorry. Never mind.
Richard, I see you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Just a quick question on the repurposing study. You seem to say it works on segment 2, which I know is really congested, and it's high shopping on weekends and all kinds of things that occur. So it just seems an odd one for repurposing, and there may be some construction cost savings, but a lot of that weekend shopping traffic, they're not going to go to 270. I mean, it just seems it is still somewhat of a strip mall or strip of malls, and I'm just wondering if how that all makes some sense if you're thinking of commuter traffic as opposed to Sunday traffic or shopping traffic, because we've been talking about people doing things somewhat off-peak and shifting and all kinds of traffic patterns, so that if you reduce the number of travel lanes, and that congestion would go up severely, and the traffic patterns that would be involved are not perhaps your traditional old school peak hour rush hour traffic patterns, but a lot more heaviness throughout the day if a good chunk of the commuters work at home some days of the week, and I just question somehow segment 2 being the only one where it works, which is the one where there in fact is an awful lot of right of way available. And I just throw that out as an engineering observation just on the basis of someone who drives there a lot?
I think some of that falls to the nature of the intersections that exist in segment 2. If you look at some of the intersections in segment 3 and segment 4, you have some pretty large intersections that are a challenge already today. If you think of Goody Drive in North Rockville, if you get up into Gaithersburg, Montgomery Village, 124, some of those intersections that are just beasts of an intersection. And what we saw with our traffic analysis for repurposing in those areas was that the delay on those particular intersections sort of spilled out into intersections on either side of them. Where in segment 2, you don't have the intersections that are quite that bad. I think Mike noted that the operations aren't great in segment 2, but
There's segment 2. I'm going to stay away from the word works, but in segment 2, there's a greatest discrepancy. There's a greatest decrease in construction costs because we add 2 median lanes and take away 2 existing lanes. So instead of having to widen the footprint of segment 2, we can almost keep it similar or close to the existing footprint of the roadway. But there are still traffic delays in the PM peak period through this segment. So it sees a cost reduction, but it still sees delays.
Well, I guess, so I would say from the department's perspective, we're not convinced that it quote unquote works. I think Mike's correct. We see a lesser degree of impacts. Now, that doesn't mean that they're acceptable impacts by any means. They're just smaller than some of the impacts we saw in some of the other locations. But we see the greatest potential benefit in terms of construction costs. That's not the driving decision of this. As we mentioned, this is a continuing investigation. We haven't settled this. This is just, we wanted to share some preliminary findings on this, but this question is definitely not settled by any stretch of the imagination as to which segment, if any segments, might have lane repurposing. And I think your points are very valid, Richard, to take into account what happens on weekends.
Or during the day shopping, if the peak is now, it's always busy as opposed to peaking busy. And I just trying to imagine Rockville Pike with 2 lanes rather than 3 lanes, and buses stopping and those, they on the right as well as on the median. It just seems hard to do with 2 lanes. I defer to your study, but at some point, there's also a vision for what Rockville Pike should look like, that some of the proponents there have a vision of what Rockville Pike should look like in segment 2, that does envision some costs to it because they have a purpose for what they're doing. Design-wise.
Thanks for the comments.
why don't I go ahead and do the next step slides, and then we can, that'll just take a minute or 2, and then not even, maybe 30 seconds, and then we can finish the rest of the time on questions, just so we can let you know what's happening next. And then we'll come back to questions, okay? So then if folks want to hop off, they can. So the next steps, and the reason I wanted to talk about this is the capital, some of this is of interest to you, potentially. The capital budget and CIP public hearings are being held February 8th and 9th. So that is next week. If you are interested in attending those, you can do so. We are seeking to complete a 25% design in April. And following that, we are going to have public outreach and an open house in late May. We are hoping to do both virtual and in-person open houses. Prior to the open house, we're going to come back to you and share the 25% plans so that we can go into detail and actually look at the roll maps on some of these topics we talked about tonight. Things like the running way configuration, free right turns, the lane repurposing, the transit center at Montgomery County, Rockville, and others, so that we can really maybe get into the weeds a little bit prior to the open house in May. So that is all I have. As always, you can contact Corey and myself if you have questions. And if folks want to stay on for questions, we are happy to jump back to questions now. So I believe Nancy had her hand up.
Yes, thanks, Jenny. Picking up on what Richard started to ask about, I know it's stated up front in the presentation that you were coordinating with Park and Planning. And as Richard said, there's this boulevard concept, which the buildings, you're supposed to make it more public placemaking. Either the buildings are coming closer to the road, or they're taking away the service lane that runs in front of many of the retail areas. And there'll be a separate, divided sort of European, through traffic in the middle, and then other bus opportunities or sitting and walking opportunities on the side. So now I'm confused. So is this plan saying that that's not going to happen? Or is that plan still happening and this is going to have to change? What is the coordination between the boulevard thing and this, if any? And if you don't mind sort of clarifying what's all going on in the mix, please.
Yeah, we are still coordinating regularly with Park and Planning, and I do believe that Jesse from Park and Planning is on today. And we are working to try and ensure that what is shown in the master plans is implemented to the greatest extent possible. And a lot of that also depends on where the status of some of the developments along the corridor are. I know specifically you're talking about probably the White Flint visioning plan that shows these lovely rendered sections with the trees and the folks sitting
and also towards Congressional North, I think it is.
Right.
There's a lot of parking lot, dead space.
There is, right. And so I don't think anything that we're proposing would preclude any of that. We're trying to make sure that what we do works in conjunction with that, whether we would repurpose the lanes or widen it, that would still work and accommodate that. What we're looking at as part of the repurposing study is there a way to potentially reduce impacts to the adjacent properties, particularly in segment 2, where we are building the 2-lane transit way, and we do have some expensive real estate costs because that redevelopment hasn't occurred yet through there, that would accommodate that future vision of that grand boulevard. So they haven't sort of set back that real estate to accommodate that. And so there are still strips of small businesses that are just strip parking in front. And so, you have to balance the vision for the future with what is there on the ground today. And so that's sort of what we're trying to make sure we accommodate both.
Okay, and even, as you approach White Flint, there's residential areas and recent build outs too. So that's good to know, because sometimes you think that there's all these plans twirling in space separately and they'll never get part of the same solar system. So thank you.
Not a problem. I think Jerry, you had your hand up next.
Yes, one of the things I don't understand is you're proposing to send more traffic to I-270, and I-270, since they're going to reduce one lane, basically a full length, 21 hours a day, 5 days a week, are proposing sending the traffic to 355. How does this quite work? You're going to send the traffic to them, they're going to send the traffic to you?
So we're not proposing to send traffic to I-270. We're looking at if we did repurpose the lanes rather than widen, what would happen? This is purely a study. This is not a proposal. We're looking to see what would happen if we said we're not going to widen to accommodate this BRT lane. We're going to take away a lane of traffic. What would happen? Would traffic go out to 270? And we're looking to see what those results are. That is still underway. So So it may be that, yes, it puts out more, would traffic divert onto 270 and would that cause problems on 270? Those are all things we're balancing as we're trying to take a look at this.
Well, someone has to sort of sit down with the plans, because since we're losing the one lane on 270, 21 hours a day, 5 days a week, no, actually, we're going to lose the one lane 7 days a week because the HOV lanes will never be able to be used. So it's 7 days a week. We're going to be losing one lane on 270. Plan is of not widening 270. So therefore, their intent was to send more traffic to 355. And one of the intersections I don't quite understand is there's an intersection where basically everyone makes a left turn from southbound 355 onto Strathmore Avenue. That currently up, we lose one lane there. So if this is going to be the same backup, we're going to be down to one lane on 355 approaching Strathmore. Northbound, it's not a problem. It's just a southbound problem. How is that going to work? Well, we don't care if we're down to one lane.
So I do want to be clear that this is an exploration of this concept. We have received numerous comments from the planning board, from community members, from the council, as to whether lane repurposing would work to reduce project costs, to keep 355 narrower, recognizing that a super wide 355, even if it has really nice transit on it, doesn't feel safe for walking. It doesn't feel like an inviting place that you want to walk and cross the street on. So it's an exploration to see whether it works. We don't have the details to share with you because it's not finished. It's only partially completed at this point. So we can definitely get into specific intersections the next time we come back and have results to share on this. We wanted to share, what information we found out to date, but it's not a set proposal. No decisions have been made. No agreements have been made with the State Highway Administration, who still owns the road. So I do want to, like, everyone take a breath, because we're not proposing to do this. We're trying to understand what this means, because a lot of people are interested in this idea about whether we can keep a narrower, pedestrian friendly 355 at the same time as we add BRT.
Well, depending where you are on 355.
Gary, can we move on to other people's questions?
Okay. As long as you don't answer the questions, then I know where the project really should go.
Jerry, you're welcome to call me and we can have a long conversation about this.
All right, so Peter, I believe you had your hand up next, and then we'll go to Richard.
Yeah, hi. My question is about budgeting and about the southern portion. A bunch of people have kind of touched on this point, but there's a huge amount of development being planned. I mean, that's going in that southern portion. And I mean, big stuff. This is a downtown for Montgomery County. And, I know that the developers all wanted a very high standard of infrastructure there. And, my question is, as a funding source, and Corey, you were starting to look at things like this with your exploration of different funding options. What about some kind of a tax increment coming off the development happening there? Portland's streetcar, the famous Portland streetcar, was 80-20 TIF from property taxes on new development in a very dense little downtown neighborhood, and it has generated, in the 20 years that system's been built, it's now responsible for 20% of the entire tax base of the city of Portland is coming off that new development within a quarter mile of the streetcar. So it's become an absolute revenue engine for the city of Portland. Why are we not looking at the same sort of thing when we've got all this development coming through the pipeline? In that part, I'm talking about between White Flint and kind of the northern, just north of Rockville Town Square. That would just seem to be a no-brainer. And yet it's, and wasn't there some kind of tax increment happening with White Flint as well? Something built into that plan?
So there is a taxing district built into White Flint. It's supposed to fund a number of transportation improvements in White Flint. And what we have found is that because the development has been slow to materialize, those sources have not come in. So the county has actually had to front load some of those improvements, like the Western workaround and some of the other roadway improvements that are currently under construction. So there are still proposals being investigated from alternative funding sources. I'm not leading that effort. There are others at the county that are leading that effort at DOT and in other county departments. So we are still continuing to look at other opportunities to fund these projects. And as soon as we have some proposals that are ready to be talked about, we're happy to talk about those.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Peter.
Richard?
Yeah, just two things. One is just hearing some of the discussion again about planning and running models for the repurposing, just hearing more explanation going back and forth with 270. I think you may be plugged into the database some very old traffic patterns that are not going to change after COVID, when you have all day peak timing and for which 270 is not an alternative because they're going up and down Rockville Pike purposefully to get between, within, I think there were some statistics that a lot of the trips are within like segment 2 when we're looking at segment planning, so that there seems to be some sort of a disconnect between the amount of traffic within segment 2 or thereabouts or down, a little bit to segment 1 and 370. I think things are changing a lot, and just this is too important to use obsolete data for obsolete assumptions on the repurposing. Secondly, and this gets back to ephemeral things, and that has to do with the looking at the funding from the opportunity lanes. Although I understand the county council, and they're going to be hearing on it, well, has cut that kind of a commitment that you've got from the state. Just looking from things that have been put in by the planning department, a lot of others, it is extremely contentious as to whether that will ever be funded before this administration ends. You'll ever get that, and you'll get the environmental impact statement. So looking to the opportunity lanes funding package is, I think, very, very speculative. I mean, there's a lot of thought that shouldn't come in until you have a solution all the way up to Frederick and have an integrated deal. So I would just say that's pretty speculative as well, if you're talking about the developers being speculative. So sort of relying on opportunity lanes, even if the county council thinks so, and they're having the hearing. There are just a lot of folks from the planning board and the county executive and others who are attacking the funding concepts behind opportunity lanes. So I'll leave it at that, but you sound like very earnest that the opportunity lanes funding is going to be there. You'll find out soon enough within the next year or so, even whether, the current administration, wouldn't require a lot of environmental revisions for what's going on. So I just throw that out in terms of speculative funding sources other than the federal grants. And that's just it.
Thanks, Richard. All great points. Are there any other questions? Any questions in the chat that we may have missed?
There is a question. We will be providing the presentation, and meeting minutes will be put up on the project website. And when that is available, we will send a link out to everybody and let you know that it is up there. So that will be coming out look for that in the coming week or two.
Yeah, just to note that all the meetings have, all the way back to, I think, meeting 1 even, have minutes and video recordings of them up on the website if you happen to miss one or curious, what's been talked about in the past.
All right, well, we are 9 minutes past our stop time. But if anybody else would like to stay on and chat, we are happy to stay with you. We could all get our happy hour glass of wine since dry January is over and talk transit until the cows come home if you'd like.
Except for Corey, who's still in the office.
Yeah, Corey's still in the office. He can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm in my home office.
Yeah.
But thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone
Stay
take
on for a
care.
few minutes if anybody else has any more questions.
Bye.